Well, welcome everyone to another dose of science. What's on tap for today? We're going to talk something about fossils. Then I'll bring you up to date on the latest on UFOs. And finally, we'll have a discussion about grieving. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Jonathan, Jerry, and Ada McVean. Jonathan will talk to us about the fossils, and Ada will be talking
Our
about
grief counselor.
Grieving. All right. We do have some things to grieve about. I mean, let's face it. Can't let go of COVID. I mean, unfortunately, it is with us. Situation is not very good. The numbers here are increasing. And the question is, why? People are throwing about all kinds of numbers. And, you know, one thing that comes up, and I've had this flung in my face now several times during the last week, that when we compare this date to last year, we have about 10 times as many infections as we had the same day last year. And so people are saying, gee, you know, most people here are vaccinated, yet we have 10 times as many infections. What is going on? Surely this shows the vaccines don't work. I've heard this several times, of course, this past week. This is a false argument. First of all, there are many differences between last year and this year. We are now dealing with the Delta variant, which of course we didn't have last year. And of course, we're also doing far more testing than we did last year. Also, at this point last year, we were in a lockdown. Nobody was getting together. Today, I think people are relaxing, and perhaps they had too optimistic a view of the vaccine. And they're staying away from the masks, they're getting together, and we're seeing the consequences of that. But the fact is that the vaccines do work. We have all kinds of documentation. Perhaps the most important one is by looking at people in hospitals. And something like 95% of people in hospitals in North America diagnosed with COVID are unvaccinated. That's meaningful because we can all deal with the sniffles and the pains and aches like Ada dealt with, right? You had the infection.
Yeah, not fun, but you can survive it.
You can survive it. What we don't want is to end up in the ICU, and we don't want to end up 6 feet under. It's better to be 6 feet away from someone laterally than vertically, right? And we also had a very good study just last week from Los Angeles, where it is very, very clear that it is the uninfected, the unvaccinated people who are showing most of the infections. So the vaccines work. No, they're not 90% effective, but that was an overly optimistic number. When you do the trials and then you observe what happens with the general population, there's always a decrease with these studies. So that wasn't so unexpected. Anyway, that's where it stands.
But there's hope on the horizon.
Unfortunately, we still have to be very careful, and
yeah.
It's just not. It's not going away. Eventually, I think it will fade somewhat into the background, like the flu has. But we're going to have to learn with this, to live with this thing, and you know.
I'm also concerned. I'm concerned a little bit about long COVID as well. You know, it's such an ill-defined cluster of symptoms, and some people get it, some people don't, because that's what's kind of different from the flu, where you don't tend to see that. So that's a little worrisome.
And also, you know, the anti-vax people constantly blurt out the statistic about 99.8% survival. So what are we worried about? Well, you know, the fact is that a 0.2% of a very large number is a very large number. You know, so in North America, I mean, what do we have? I mean, 150 million people unvaccinated, something like that. So a large percentage of those will eventually get infected. And even if only 0.2% of them die, that is still a very large number. And, you know, just like we constantly say that a large percent increase in a very small number still leaves you with a very small number. Well, this is quite the converse of that. A small percent of a very large number leaves you with a very large number. So
it's easy to pick the numbers that you like that fit your story.
Yeah. But there's hope, at least. The vaccine passport, when this comes out, it will have already been started.
Yes, I mean, that's one step forward. Where we need a bigger step forward is in the vaccination rate. I mean, I think we're doing okay here, but in the US, in some areas, it's just tragic. And they're seeing the consequences. I mean, look at Texas and Louisiana. There's no ICU beds to be had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see, even here though, with the mandate, if we will see a spike in vaccination first doses, because I know when they announced the mandate, there was like a statistical spike. So I'd be shocked if there wasn't one now.
I think so. I think you're right. Anyway, I've got my passport. I'm sure you have yours. But where are we going to go with this passport?
Exactly.
I'm actually going to a VR experience very soon, and I just got an email saying that starting from when I'm going to go, you will need to have your vaccine passport. So only people who are vaccinated and can prove it are allowed inside for the exhibit. So that's one answer to your question.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's get down to your fossil story.
So I want to talk about this thing here. So this is a trilobite, and this is a fossil. I believe I bought this years ago at the gift shop of a museum in England. And these things are very common. You can find them all over the world. And I'm going to share my screen because I have some slides. And this is going to be a little bit interactive as well. So trilobites basically means 3 lobes. And I don't know if you can see the cursor of my mouse right now. Yep. But you can see, for example, so this is the head, this is the body, and this is the tail. So it has 3 lobes, trilobites. So what are trilobites? Why do I want to talk about these things? So trilobites, there we go. They were animals. In fact, they were marine arthropods. So they lived in the sea, and they were arthropods, just like insects, like spiders, like crustaceans. They are extinct, so they no longer exist, but they have existed for almost 270 million years. In fact, they're some of the most successful living organisms on this planet. But we haven't seen them. There have been a wave of extinctions, and the last one was about 252 million years before now. So it's been a while since they roamed the earth, so to speak. They have no known descendants, but their closest living relatives are the chelicerates, and that includes sea spiders and arachnids, things like spiders and scorpions, horseshoe crabs. And we know of over 20,000 species of trilobites. So it's a very, very diverse group of animals. And one of those species is the Han Solo. So there's a little artist rendering on the left there. And so, so when we're talking about the name of a species in Latin, the taxonomy is basically 2 names. The first one is a genus, which is the category above species. And then you have the species name. And Han was given because it was discovered in China and was in honor of the Han Chinese. And then the scientists decided to make a bit of a joke and call the species Solo. And so you now have a trilobite called the Han Solo. This is not the first organism named after a Star Wars character. This is the Wakia Chewbacca. It's a moth. And this is the Trigonopterus Yoda, which is a type of weevil. So, scientists can have fun out in the field naming things. There are all kinds of weird names for living things, and some of them are names of Star Wars characters. So trilobites, coming back to trilobites. So the fossilized trilobites that we find, like the one that I showed earlier, they are often, though not always, but usually they're just the molted exoskeleton of that animal, because it will molt out of its exoskeleton and leave it behind. And that exoskeleton is made of a number of calcium-based minerals and a lattice of chitin, which is a type of sugar that forms a shell of a lot of these arthropods. So basically, one animal, one trilobite, could, in theory, during its life, leave multiple fossils as it molts out of its exoskeleton multiple times. These exoskeletons fossilize very, very easily, and so you end up with these trilobite fossils. So they were animals, right? They had eyes. The lenses of the eyes of these trilobites were made of the same mineral that is found in Tums, calcium carbonate. They had gills, they had a toothless mouth and a stomach, they had antennae, they had legs coming out of their head, their body, their tail. So they're very, very cool, cool little creatures. And most of them were about an inch in diameter or smaller, so very, very small animals. The one that I showed earlier is about 9 centimeters, I think. And I think what is the biggest trilobite fossil ever found is the Isotellus rex, which was found in Manitoba. It measures 28 inches, which is just a little bit more than 2 of those big 30-centimeter rulers back to back. So a big boy. Now, something that I found out as I was looking into this, which is quite interesting, which sort of brings us back to our mission at the OSS of separating sense from nonsense and fact from fiction, is that apparently there are a lot of fake trilobite fossils around. A lot of them are coming out of Morocco. So these trilobite fossils can be found all over the world, but Morocco has kind of become the Hollywood of fake trilobite prop making, and so people are using these resins to make these fake fossils. They're painting them. They're using rubber glue. Some of them are using these very high-tech polymer plastics, and so they're essentially creating movie props that are then sold to unsuspecting customers who want to acquire beautiful trilobite fossils, and they're actually buying a fake. And this is from one of the websites that I was reading about this. And so there are these specialty workshops that have been set up in Morocco to make very specific types of fossils. And the suppliers of these fakes are like physicians. They will specialize in a type of trilobite or specific technique. So there's a guy who only does Cambrian fakes, and there's one who only does Ordovician fakes. And this guy makes complete specimens out of partial ones, and this other guy supplies the fake spines, and this one makes. So they all have their specialties, and they're making these fake trilobite fossils. So what I thought would be interesting is if we would play a game. And I'm going to show you pictures of trilobite fossils, and I will ask you to tell me if you think it is a fake fossil or if it's the genuine article. Are you ready?
I'm ready, but first I really want to know how you know that yours is real.
Well, I didn't say, I did not claim that it was real, but okay. I will say that looking at it, it is so ugly, and like it's not a beautiful fossil. And so for somebody to fake this and to make it look this bad makes me think that it's probably the real deal. But I don't know. I mean, I was looking at this going, oh, is this real or is this fake? I don't actually know.
Sometimes you have to give begrudging respect to the people who can produce these fakes, because
Absolutely.
it takes a lot of skill to do that.
Absolutely. So let's play this game, shall we?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
First one. So what about these? Are they real or fake?
Those look fake.
I'd say they're fake. There's too many of them look the same.
Exactly. Yeah. They look like they just came off of a factory. These are indeed fake trilobite fossils. What about this one?
Can you hold up yours again? We need a point of comparison.
You want mine? I have to stop sharing my screen.
I need to see your ugly one too.
There we go. No. So this is the one that I have.
Okay.
This is from like I said, it's from a museum gift shop. But I did read that some museums were being offered fake ones, so it's possible to get a fake one from the shop. So let's go back to our slide here. So what about this one? Real or fake?
It looks very symmetrical.
Yeah, I'm going fake.
Yeah,
fake. All right, so it is fake, but it is technically made up of 2 real fossils. So the top part with the head and the body is from one species of trilobite. This is a genuine fossil, but it was artificially glued to the tail of a different species of trilobite. So they created this sort of artificial chimera that never existed. Huh. So it is made from 2 real trilobite fossils, but put together, it is essentially a fake.
You know, it's sort of reminiscent of Barnum's fakes.
Yeah,
right.
Yes, would take the head of a monkey and put it on the body of a fish and say it was the skeleton of a mermaid.
Yeah. So both parts are real, but put together, it's a fake. What about this one?
Well,
Now
that's
I
gotta
think
be
they
real.
all look fake. I think they all look totally fake now.
Joe,
just
what do you think?
Statistically, that if you've shown two fakes, the next one must be real.
You
Okay,
sound like a student taking one of your own multiple choice
Right.
exams.
so Joe goes for real. Ada, you say it's a fake. So this is
No, I'm saying it's real. Final
you're saying
answer,
it's
real.
real. Okay, so you're both wrong. It's fake. The head is real, the tail is real, but the body is made of plastic. That's incredible, right? So they're using paint. They're using paint to match the rest of the fossil and bridge it and put it together. So very cleverly done. This is a fake. What about this one?
That looks very real because it looks like a scientific diagram.
Well, it could be a diagram of
eventually
here's why it's a fake.
real.
So you're saying, Joe, you're saying it's real, Ada?
Yeah.
What do you say?
I think it's real.
Okay. It is real. This is a genuine trilobite fossil.
I was worried they were all going to be fake.
And here's the last one.
Looks a bit too shiny.
Too shiny.
Too shiny, too processed.
Okay, so you're saying it's a fake?
I think it's real because the arms on one side are a lot shorter than the arms on the other side. That's what I'm going with.
Okay, so those are legs, by the way, but it is a genuine, it's a beautifully preserved natural trilobite fossil. So hopefully what I've proved with this is that it's very difficult to tell if a trilobite fossil is real or not. Here are some clues that I found when I was reading up on this. So some of them are made, as I said, from this resin, and it will capture these air bubbles inside. So if you look very closely and you see these trapped air bubbles, that probably indicates that this is made of resin and it's a fake. They recommend buying from reputable dealers. There are some anonymous websites out there where you can buy allegedly beautiful and 100% authentic trilobite fossils, but try and stick to reputable dealers. And you can ask an experienced fossil collector for their opinion. As people who are used to this will know what to look for to identify real ones from the fakes. So trilobites are really cool animals, really beautiful fossils, but be careful because there are lots of fakes out there, and all those there that I'm showing right now, those are all fakes, by the way. So that's what I had to say about
all right, well, we learned
fossils.
something about trilobites.
There we go.
Great stuff.
I like
All right,
Now,
we got something to show as well. And this may be easier to interpret.
Oh, it's a flying Roomba. Careful there.
What you just saw, I think, would be described as a UFO, right?
Yep.
Because you can't exactly identify what this thing is.
Indeed.
true.
My guess is it's a new flying Roomba.
Yes. So that's
Air purifier.
That's what I want to talk about. And let me see if I can just share my screen here. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So UFOs, of course, that's the term that everyone is familiar with, which stands for unidentified flying object. Although the expression that is being used more and more now, especially in light of the recent Pentagon report, is UAP, which is unidentified aerial phenomena. Now, one thing to understand here, that neither of these implies anything extraterrestrial. It just means that it hasn't been explained. So, for example, when we look at this, until you have identified this as your friend's Frisbee, you've seen a UFO, an unidentified flying object. And these are seen very often, and we have pictures, all kinds of pictures. And if we take a look at a map of the US, where people have claimed to have seen UFOs, it's all over the place. So these things are flying everywhere in our atmosphere. But what is interesting is that there are 6 billion pictures being taken today, every day. That's the estimate, because we're all running around with our digital cameras. 6 billion pictures being taken around the world every day. And yet, every picture that is taken of a supposed flying saucer that is extraterrestrial looks like it was taken by a camera manufactured in the 1930s, being held by someone who has Parkinson's disease. There's not one reliable picture that we have. Nevertheless, it makes for a very interesting story. I think the most famous story was the one that we hear about, the supposed crash of a saucer in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. And this was reported in newspapers about how the Air Force actually had documented this. Later, that headline was withdrawn, but there seemed to be some physical evidence for whatever crashed there. Although it doesn't really look like some sort of super sophisticated remnants of some flying device. It looks more like the remnants of a balloon, which is just what it was, as I'll explain just a moment. But anyway, this is what really started the explosion of books and articles about flying saucers and about aliens, because supposedly there were 3 aliens that crashed in Roswell, and they were, of course, spirited away and hidden by the Air Force, and they were autopsied, and there was even a film that we saw of that autopsy that was released just a few years ago. Yeah. And it made the rounds, alien autopsy. Of course, it was totally fake. And very well done, though, very well done. The aliens looked pretty good, but it wasn't difficult to discover that this was a fake video because they made some very elementary mistakes. For example, the telephone in the video here, and you can see the coiled wire in the telephone. Well, that coiled wire was not introduced until the 1950s, which was supposedly later than this video was made.
But they put the aliens in a freezer and they waited a few years before doing an autopsy.
No, the aliens brought the phone.
Yes,
but anyway, home. One thing that this crash landing really did was put New Roswell on the map, and it has become the capital of alien visitations and a tourist mecca. All kinds of stores sell alien phenomena, and but anyway, to separate the sense from nonsense, the Roswell report came out and explained exactly what had happened there. There was a crash, but it was not of any kind of alien spacecraft, but it was top secret, because at that time, the US was launching high altitude balloons to monitor Soviet rocket launches. And they were even experimenting with potentially sending people up to be observers. But before they did that, they ran some experiments with dummies. And they actually put these dummies under a balloon, and they went up to great heights. And one of these balloons crashed. And indeed, the Air Force supposedly very quickly spirited away the remnants because it was a top secret operation. So that is what is believed to have happened in Roswell, New Mexico. And a very similar case occurred in England, the so-called Rendlesham case. Interesting, sham being the end of that word. But anyway, there is a place in England which was just in a forest just outside of a US Air Force installation. And here too, supposedly in the middle of the night, there was a landing, and there's a monument there to what supposedly was seen. This has been extensively explored, and there are all kinds of explanations that have been put forward. But the flashing lights that they saw in the forest was explained because there was a lighthouse that was right in line with an opening in the trees. And this is what supposedly was described as flashing lights from the flying saucer. Anyway, of course, a great deal has been written about this. But very recently, we heard about the Pentagon releasing a report, Assessment of Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, and this got a lot of press. because they had some interesting pictures taken by US Navy pilots, which could not be explained. And to this day, they're not really explained. There are all kinds of explanations from experts that have been put forward about what this really was. The explanations range anywhere from super secret drones to flying geese. But no one has really documented exactly what this is. It is indeed an unexplained phenomenon. However, an article in the New Yorker, which generally is a very good magazine, made much more of this than scientifically one could. And they interviewed Leslie Kean, who is a self-appointed UFO expert, which she isn't. There are many, many real scientists who have looked into this phenomena. And just to give you an idea of the kind of belief that she has written about surviving death. She's a believer in ghosts. She claims that she had an absolute documented visitation from a ghost. So I think one has to be skeptical about everything that Leslie says. Finally, there are, of course, reports of kidnappings where people have been spirited away by UFOs. And one of the most famous ones was the Barney and Betty Hill kidnapping, which is interesting for us here because they were actually returning through New Hampshire from Montreal. And they lost 2 hours, which they eventually remembered that they had been abducted and questioned by aliens, etc. And this has become so famous that there is actually a marker on the road in New Hampshire where this event supposedly took place. Obviously, there's absolutely no evidence that this really happened, aside from Barney and Betty's say-so. So I think that there's no question that there are unexplained flying objects out there. There are phenomena that we just don't know what they are. It does not mean that they are extraterrestrial spaceships. I wish that they were, because that would certainly make our world much more interesting. I think that today, of course, we have no chance to travel. And indeed, this would be great if we were to be able to be kidnapped by some alien ship. We could get out of this COVID atmosphere. But I don't think it's going to happen. But that being said, though, I think it is also pretty egotistical of us to think that in this gigantic universe, living on this lowly little planet in an insignificant galaxy, that we would be the only place where life has evolved. I think that is very improbable. However, it is even more improbable that other civilizations are visiting us purely because of the fantastic distances that are involved. But anyway, so that's my little story here about UFOs. And I'm looking forward to seeing some authentic pictures that look like they've been taken by, one of our modern cameras and in focus. But of course, we also know that these days we can't say that seeing is believing because there's Photoshop and there's CGI. So even a picture would not be terribly convincing. Anyway, that's where we stand.
Have you ever been to Roswell?
I've been to Roswell.
How was it?
It's a really neat place to go because everything is, alien themed. The menus are all alien themed. I mean, it's interesting how they have really capitalized, of course, on on this. Yeah. There's also a very good alien museum in Las Vegas, actually, where they have some, very nice displays, and they have the. Here's my little Roswell alien.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
This is known as the Gray, right? This is
the purchased in Roswell.
Yeah, the archetypal alien. Yes, exactly. Authentic.
You can buy every size. You can,
even life size?
Big selection.
Even life size?
Life size. Oh yeah, life size.
Like for how big the aliens actually were.
Yes. Oh yeah.
But then you have to fly back on a plane.
Authentic replicas. All right, let's switch to something a little bit more serious. Ada.
Yeah, I feel a bit bad to bring down the mood, but if we give you too much hope, you might forget there's a pandemic on. So gotta end on a bit of a downer. But it's a bit of a downer, but also a bit of an upper. Let me just share my screen. It's my turn. Because I want to talk about the 5 stages of grief, specifically why they suck. That is a gross, overgeneralization, but I think you might see my perspective once we talk about it a bit more. And so this is largely based on research I did for an article a couple of years ago, actually, but it's a topic that stayed really present in my mind no matter what. So it's something I often look back at, and yeah, it's becoming relevant again because a whole bunch of people are dying of this disease called COVID or something about that.
No, it's all a hoax.
It's all a hoax, yeah. So the Kubler-Ross, so the 5 stages of grief, or the 5 stages of dying, alternatively called the Kubler-Ross method or the DABDA model. It was invented by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, so that's where that name comes from. And it's, I always get it wrong. It's depression, anger, bargaining,
Denialism.
Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And these are supposedly the stages that one goes through or one should go through when grieving. So first something bad happens, maybe someone in your life dies. You will first try to deny it. You will then be angry about it, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the 5 stages in detail. And they're always written, they're 5 stages. So they're written as stage 1 through 5. And they're generally thought of as a progressive thing, a progressive model that you start at stage 1 and you progress through to stage 5. And that means you're done. Like, congrats, you graduated grieving school, you get a grieving certificate, you did it right, good job.
It's used a lot in badly written TV shows. It's a trope that you see again and again when the character is dealing with grief. Oh, stage 2, stage 3.
I think my first introduction to it was on like a Disney Channel animated show called Fillmore. And that's always stuck with me because I was like, what is he talking about? That's not how grief works. Took me a couple, 20 more years to figure out that was a scientific opinion, but there are a lot of benefits to this kind of model. Like, there's a reason that it has stayed in our cultural consciousness for so long. It provides a lot of structure in a really chaotic time. When you lose someone you love, particularly if there's someone that was very close to you, and particularly if it was very sudden or violent or unexpected, to say life gets chaotic is such an understatement. And this is something that provides structure. It tells you what's going on. It tells you that how you're feeling is okay. It lets you know that you're doing it right. And it also provides you a way out of the depression. Because if you say you're in stage 1, then that means you will eventually get to stage 2 and 3 and 4, and that means it will eventually end. So it highlights the temporary nature of grief, but it can have some really bad effects when you start to look a bit more into it. Because unfortunately, the model is not evidence-based. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was initially a psychiatrist or a psychiatry student. And while she was doing her residency at a New York hospital, she basically saw how little care and love and attention and respect was given to terminally ill patients, and decided that she was going to change that, or at least try to, and saw how poorly they psychologically dealt with their own condition, how poorly their loved ones dealt with the conditions, and even how poorly the medical practitioners around them were able to conceive of their conditions. So she decided to make that her area of interest. And she eventually cites, she came up with the DABDA model after talking to over 200 dying patients. And that sounds pretty good when you say it like that. Like, wow, you personally spoke to over 200 dying patients. But the problem is that 200 dying patients are 200 anecdotes, and anecdotes are not a really good form of evidence. But none of that matters if we can validate the theory empirically. So even if the theory came from a non-evidence-based place, if it works, it works. We can test that.
It's hypothesis generating.
Yes. And indeed, lots of people have tried to test it. A Barrett study from 1981 looked at 193 widowed individuals over 62 years of age in Wichita, and indeed concluded that there was no successive stages, no adjustment. Everybody was all over the place. They could not find any patterns in the way that people were reacting to their bereavement. A different 2002 study looked at 205 individuals from Detroit. It actually they were enrolled in a different study, but then because that study had information about their marital status and such, if their spouses died, they were offered to be enrolled in this supplementary study. And only 11% of them ended up following what was called a normal grief trajectory. And even in the studies that do support, or at least say that they support the DABDA model, I would argue that they still don't. For example, this study by Makiajewski, never been good at that name, from 2007, it looked at 255 bereaved individuals from Connecticut. And in their abstract, they say that they identified the, quote, normal stages of grief. But they excluded people that were doing too well. So people that didn't get depressed or angry or upset enough, according to them. They also excluded people who were doing too poorly. So people that had to seek treatment for depression or had like very, I guess, significant mental health struggles due to it. And they also didn't look at the data longitudinally. So if they were studying me, they wouldn't look at me, say 6 months before my bereavement and 6 months after, but rather they would look at me 6 months before and then a different participant 6 months after and say, oh, well, in general, the trend is like this. But in the subjective quizzes that they gave to the participants at many data points throughout it, acceptance was actually the highest endorsed feeling throughout the entire thing. Before bereavement and after, when asked to pick off the list of how you may be feeling, acceptance was endorsed all the time. And so if that's only the final stage of this model, then how can it be also constant? And so the model is meant as descriptive. It's meant to describe what's happening, to say like, this is how we observe this happening in humans, but it becomes prescriptive, as in once you lose somebody, you start to feel as though this is how you have to act, how this is you're supposed to grieve, this is what you're supposed to do. And that becomes really, really upsetting if that's not how grief works for you. If you are not feeling this like shock and denial, then you can start to worry things like, am I not normal? Am I not grieving properly? Did I not love the person enough? Did I love them too much? Does my brain not work well? And none of these are thoughts that you want to be having when you're already dealing with the death of a loved one. And Kubler-Ross herself has actually walked back the idea that the stages are sequential. A book came out 2 years after her death in 2003, wherein she says that the stages are not stops on some linear timeline. Not everybody goes through them all or in a prescribed order. So to call them stages is just baffling to me, given that they're neither mandatory nor sequential. But if the model helps people, then for the people it helps, then that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But for the people it hurts, we need to start remembering that this is just one model of grief, not the proper model of grief, not how you're supposed to grieve. It's just one way, that one type of model that may help you understand how you're feeling. And so there are alternative models. Mostly they're task-based. And that's because there's actually a lot to do when someone around you dies. Funerals are really difficult to try to organize, trying to pick up the pieces of your life, trying to figure out what happens with things like jobs and banks and kids and pets. A lot of people end up with like to-do lists and tasks right after. And so using those as the filter to examine your grief through have more than a few proponents. And so there's Core in 1992, who modeled it off of 4 different areas of work, in saying that for somebody to finally feel better after a period of grief, they need to satisfy both are all four of these areas. So the physical, the psychological, the social, and the spiritual need. And they do that through doing various tasks. And DOCA, which was originally in 1993, is much more complicated, but very similar in the end. It divides bereavement and also illness into different periods of tasks. So there's a pre-diagnostic task phase, and then a phase while you have the illness, and a phase afterwards, but it's all about tasks. And that seems a lot more applicable to people's lives, because a lot of people have to do certain tasks, not others. Some things you can pick and choose as you want, as opposed to having to be forced to go through these 5 stages. And so I mentioned that I was inspired to write this article a few years ago. And I really particularly found this quote that I just loved while I was doing so. Our grief is as individual as our lives. And that's actually a Kubler-Ross quote. So to me, that kind of ends up going almost exactly against her 5-stage model. But in her new idea, where it's not prescriptive, it's not mandatory, but rather this is just a description of how people can feel, it's not such an antithesis. You can let those ideas coexist. I wrote this article after my mom died, and I actually started writing it the very night she died, because I didn't know what else to do. It wasn't because the OSS is crazy about deadlines and I just had to get that article in or something. It's just because I didn't know what else to do. And I really wonder what stage she would have put me in then. If the night my mom dies, I'm researching the 5 stages of death and trying to see what the state of anthropology and social science and psychology is on grief. But anyways, it's a pretty good article, or at least I think so. So you can go check it out if you want to read a bit more. But if you only take one takeaway from this part of me talking at you, grief is totally individual, and however you grieve or however you don't grieve is totally okay. So long as you are satisfied and happy and feel comfortable with the way that you are getting through things, then that's all you need. And given a pandemic, unfortunately, a lot of us are going to be dealing with a lot of grieving if we haven't already. So I think that that's very much something to keep in mind for yourself as well as for the loved people in your life.
Thank you. That actually affords a segue into first mention of our symposium, because what we're going to deal with this year, October 25th and 26th, is the science of life and death. And we will have a guest speaker who's a mortician. She'll look at the science of embalming, risk associated with it, the science of putting makeup on a corpse. I think it should be very interesting. We'll also have a discussion on the origin of life, and also on how to prevent aging. And I will take a shot at discussing spiritualism and talking to the dead. Unfortunately, because of COVID, this again will be virtual, and we'll be giving you a lot more information about this as the weeks pass by. But you can jot down October 25 and 26, 7 o'clock in the evening, for this year's Trottier Symposium. So we've covered a lot of ground here today. We actually started with a type of death, right, with fossils, and ended up with death as well. And in the middle, we had some UFOs. Just saw another one. It is supposed to come back.
Risk of injury is not negligible.
Yes. All right, so we will see you all in 2 weeks' time. So thanks everyone for listening.
Goodbye.
Bye.